July 25th, 1938, 20 Northmore Road, Oxford, England. J.R.R. Tolkien sat at his desk, staring at a letter that had arrived from Berlin. It was from Rutten and Loening, a prestigious German publishing house. They wanted to translate The Hobbit into German. The book had been a massive success since its publication in September 1937, selling out its first print run almost immediately, receiving glowing reviews, becoming a beloved children's book across Britain and America. Now Germany wanted it. Tolkien should have been pleased. International recognition, a German translation, more money, more readers. But there was a problem. Buried in the letter, written in careful bureaucratic German, was a question. Could Professor Tolkien please provide proof of his Arisch Abstammung, the German phrase for Aryan descent? Tolkien read the sentence 3 times. Then he set down the letter, picked up his pen, and began drafting a response that would become one of the most famous rejections in literary history. This is the story of why a German publisher wanted Tolkien's work in 1938, why Germanic mythology and ancient Nordic themes fascinated the Nazi regime, and why Tolkien, despite having every financial and professional reason to comply, refused to give them what they wanted. So why did German publishers want The Hobbit? The Hobbit was not a typical children's book. It was steeped in Germanic mythology. Dragons, dwarves with Nordic names, Thorin, Fili, Kili, Balin, Dwalin, names pulled directly from the Prose Edda, an ancient Icelandic text, runes, ancient languages, heroes on quests. The entire book drew from the same mythological wellspring that Nazi ideologues were obsessed with, the noble northern spirit of ancient Germanic and Nordic cultures. This was no coincidence. Tolkien was a philologist, a scholar of ancient languages. He had studied Old English, Old Norse, Gothic, and medieval German literature throughout his academic career. He was an expert on Beowulf, the ancient Anglo-Saxon epic. He had translated the Volsunga Saga, an Icelandic tale of dragon slayers and cursed treasure. When Tolkien wrote The Hobbit, he was consciously drawing on these mythological traditions. Smaug the dragon was inspired by Fafnir from the Volsunga Saga. The dwarves were modeled on the dwarves of Norse mythology. The whole structure, a quest for treasure, a dragon guarding gold, a hero's journey, echoed ancient Germanic stories. German publishers recognized this immediately. The Hobbit was not just another children's fantasy. It was a modern retelling of the myths the Germans considered part of their cultural heritage. And in 1938, Nazi Germany, that heritage was everything. To understand why Rutten and Loening wanted The Hobbit, you have to understand what was happening in Germany in 1938. Adolf Hitler had been in power since 1933. In those 5 years, the Nazi Party had systematically reshaped German culture around a single idea: that Germans were descended from a superior Aryan race of ancient Nordic warriors. This was not just political propaganda, it was a cultural movement. The Nazis promoted ancient Germanic legends. They celebrated Viking warriors. They glorified the old gods, Odin, Thor, the Valkyries. They commissioned operas based on Nordic myths. They sent scholars to Iceland to study ancient sagas. They designed SS uniforms with runes copied from ancient Germanic inscriptions. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's minister of propaganda, controlled all cultural production in Germany. Books were burned, artistic works were banned, but anything that celebrated Germanic mythology Anything that portrayed ancient Northern Europeans as noble heroes was promoted. The Hobbit fit perfectly into this cultural project. Here was a book written by a respected Oxford professor that treated Germanic myths seriously. It portrayed dwarves not as fairy tale creatures, but as ancient Nordic warriors. It featured dragons and treasure and quests, themes from the old sagas that the Nazis revered. Rutten and Loening saw an opportunity. This book could be marketed to German children as a celebration of their mythological heritage. It could reinforce the Nazi narrative that Germanic culture was superior, ancient, and worthy of pride. But there was a legal problem. In 1938, Nazi Germany, only Aryan authors could be published. Any author of uncertain racial background had to provide documentation, proving they were not part of groups the Nazis deemed undesirable. So Rutten and Loening sent a letter to Oxford. They asked Tolkien a question. They asked all foreign authors, "Can you prove your Aryan descent?" They expected a simple yes, a document, a family tree, standard paperwork. What they got instead was a letter that would haunt them and inspire readers for generations. Tolkien drafted 2 replies. The first was diplomatic. It politely sidestepped the question without directly answering it. The second was a masterpiece of controlled rage. Tolkien sent both drafts to his British publisher, Stanley Unwin, and asked which should be sent. Unwin chose the second, the one that directly confronted the Nazi request. Tolkien then replied with this letter: "Thank you for your letter. I regret that I am not clear as to what you intend by Irish. I am not of Aryan extraction, that is Indo-Iranian. As far as I am aware, none of my ancestors spoke Hindustani, Persian, Gypsy, or any related dialects." This opening was brilliant. Tolkien, a philologist and an expert in languages, was correcting the Nazis on their own terminology. The word Aryan originally referred to Indo-Iranian peoples. It had nothing to do with Northern Europeans. By pointing this out, Tolkien was exposing the fundamental ignorance behind Nazi racial theory. He continued, "But if I am to understand that you are inquiring whether I am of such origin, I can only reply that I regret that I appear to have no ancestors of that gifted people." This was a direct rebuke. Tolkien was saying, in the most polite way possible, that he wished he did have that heritage, because those people are gifted. He was not defending himself against an accusation. He was defending the people the Nazis were persecuting. Then Tolkien got personal. "My great-great-grandfather came to England in the 18th century from Germany. The main part of my descent is therefore purely English, and I am an English subject, which should be sufficient. I have been accustomed, nonetheless, to regard my German name with pride, and continued to do so throughout the period of the late regrettable war in which I served in the English army." Tolkien was reminding them that he had German ancestry. He was proud of it. He had fought against Germany in World War I, but he never stopped being proud of his German name. And then the final blow. I cannot, however, forbear to comment that if impertinent and irrelevant inquiries of this sort are to become the rule in matters of literature, then the time is not far distant when a German name will no longer be a source of pride. Tolkien was telling the Nazis directly that they were destroying the very culture they claimed to celebrate. He signed the letter. "I trust you will find this reply satisfactory, and remain yours faithfully, J.R.R. Tolkien." The German word he used for lineage at the end, Abstammung, was the same word the Nazis had used in their request. Tolkien could have complied, He could have sent the paperwork, proven his ancestry, published The Hobbit in Germany, made money, reached millions of German readers. Instead, he refused. Why? Because Tolkien understood something the Nazis did not. Germanic mythology did not belong to them. In a letter to his son Michael in 1941, Tolkien wrote, "I have in this war a burning private grudge against that ruddy little ignoramus Adolf Hitler, ruining, perverting, misapplying, and making forever accursed that noble northern spirit, a supreme contribution to Europe, which I have ever loved and tried to present in its true light." This is the heart of Tolkien's objection. He loved Germanic mythology. He had devoted his life to studying it, preserving it, celebrating it. But the Nazis were perverting it. They were taking stories about heroism, sacrifice, and the struggle against evil, and turning them into propaganda for racism and conquest. Tolkien refused to let his work become part of that perversion. Part 5. The Consequences. The deal with Rutten and Loening collapsed. The Hobbit was not translated into German, not in 1938, not in 1939, not during the entire Nazi era. It would take 19 years, until 1957, 12 years after Nazi Germany's defeat, before The Hobbit was finally published in German as Kleiner Hobbit, under Grosse Zauberer, translated by Walter Scherf. By then, Germany had been rebuilt. The Nazi regime was gone. The cultural landscape had changed entirely. And Tolkien's refusal in 1938 had become legendary. Epilogue. What this reveals. The story of Tolkien and the Nazi publishers reveals something important about art, politics, and integrity. Germanic mythology was fascinating to the Nazi regime. They promoted it relentlessly. They used it to justify their ideology. They wanted works like The Hobbit to reinforce their narrative about Aryan superiority. But Tolkien refused to play along. Not because he rejected Germanic mythology, he loved it, but because he refused to let his work be used to promote hatred. He understood that the myths he cherished, stories of heroism, sacrifice, and the fight against tyranny, were the opposite of what the Nazis represented. And so, at a time when many British intellectuals were sympathetic to Germany, when appeasement was national policy, when speaking out could have cost him his career, Tolkien said no. He chose integrity over profit, principle over publication, and in doing so, he proved that even in the darkest times, artists can refuse to compromise. The Hobbit would eventually reach German readers, but it would do so on Tolkien's terms, not theirs. That matters, because the stories we tell and who gets to control them shape the world we live in. Tolkien understood that, and he refused to let the Nazis shape his.